So, what happens when you put magical girls and idols into a pot, add a dash of mecha and suffering into the mix and fill it all up with Yuri, just to take that pot and throw it through a wall? This. Alright, before I get into this, I want to explain that I will be extremely biased in this review. Not only do I only cover anime I've watched a few years back in this series, Symphogear itself is of extremely high importance to me, and I will probably forever see its first 2 seasons with very rose-tinted glasses. You see, Symphogear was the first real gateway anime for me. It wasn't the first anime I watched knowing it was an anime. That place belongs to the furry fest that's Tokyo Mew Mew, and I definitely did watch a lot of other shows between that and Symphogear. It was, however, the first show to really broaden my horizon to the point where I could see the entire medium, instead of the endless, wholesome whirlpool of cotton candy and magical girl shows I was watching back then. While definitely not up there with the likes of Madoka, it was the first more serious and somewhat dark show I ever saw, and the world it built really managed to immerse and amaze me. Heck, it still does so to an extent today. However, without wanting to say that they're high now, my personal standards were much lower back then. Not only was I a lot younger, just entering puberty, which explains another draw the show had for me, I also hadn't seen nearly as many anime as is natural for someone who just discovered the medium. I had no sort of ability to critically deconstruct the show, so I could just lean back, watch it, and enjoy the ride it took me on, while my brain built this stunning world in my head. Hey, that's the main reason Sword Art Online gets praised by quote-unquote normies who just discovered anime themselves. It's an absolutely amazing show if you just do what I was forced to do for Symphogear. Just don't give a damn and enjoy it. Now, engaging with the show as little as I did does come with its issues. The main one being that, even with my undying love for this franchise, until this very rewatch, I took a stance that made me ignore some of the greatest strengths of the entirety of Symphogear, even during later seasons when I was at a point in my anime journey where I could totally enjoy these things. Now, that that's out of the way, anyone still here? No? Well, come back, because I have a story to tell. Oh god damn it! So, the opening scene immediately hits shit home as someone who knows the ending. Sad Girl is visiting a dead girl's grave in an almost post-apocalyptic looking city. This is the present time in the show's timeline, and even though the anime says otherwise, the entire thing from here on out is basically a flashback until we get back to this point. After that, the first episode also gives us Whiplash, with a roller coaster ride where we get in, are introduced absolutely to main characters, the show's gloomy themes, and this smooth motherfucker, you get a surprisingly well animated concert scene, especially if you consider the rather low budget the show had, as it was both being an original show and the anime debut for writer Akifumi Kaneko, who is also known for his Wild Arms series, are attacked and blown up by Babylonian aliens. We see main character 1 and the dead girl from the opening scene die. See that dead girl isn't actually dead, which means that I actually need to use names now. Get a musical school as her main setting, are introduced to the sort of relationships that girl Miku and that girl Hibiki have. See that main character 2 Tsubasa also goes to the school despite being an idol, and shortly after we are introduced to the fact that apparently Hibiki inherited main character 1 and true dead girl Kanade's powers to wield the name-giving Symphogear Gungnir, giving us this meme of a shot! And thus the stage is set. Throughout the show, we get into all kinds of trouble, like meeting antagonist 1, Chris, seeing her get abused by the overly sexual, shape-shifting scientist and supervillain Yoko aka Fine, turning Chris into main character 4 after a redemption arc, as well as finding ourselves in some politics drama between the US and Japan. We also get some nice insight into Hibiki's and Miku's relationship, as Hibiki has to keep making excuses for herself for not turning up or being late on multiple occasions, because being a magical girl and everything, of course she can't reveal her powers. That would get Miku into trouble. Yes, this is a pretty highly used trope in magical girl shows, and it's definitely one I usually dislike myself, but here it's actually executed pretty well and is cleverly interwoven with a few other story threads we see popping up here and there. Though, I have to say that it's probably me being blinded by my love for the series, or just my standards being low enough to see it like that. Fuck, it's probably all of the free. So as a very brief synopsis, these are noise. Noise are bad. Symphogears are music-powered battle armor made from so-called relics to fight noise. Hibiki doesn't know what to do as a rookie gear user, but tries to get literal edgelord Tsubasa to warm up to her. Bad things and bad people happen, and thus, we have the story. All of that aside, Symphogear is a pretty wild ride, and it really isn't one you will want to get off of, especially with the fucking amazing music! Seriously. This is one of the things I was talking about when I said,
until this very rewatch, I took a stance that made me ignore some of the greatest strengths of the entirety of Symphogear.
This OST is like the original lead developer for Minecraft. Top notch. Music is fucking awesome and incredibly unique. If I were to play two similar songs, one of which is from Symphogear, you would be able to tell exactly which one is from the show. Fuck it, let's do it right now. I'll now play two clips of a song and you can vote on the info card up in the right corner which of them you think is not from the Symphogear OST. So, what did you think? Well, whatever you picked, joke's on you! Sample 1 is an instrumental of a character insert song and sample 2 is background music. Which actually brings me to my next point, being that even with how much contrast and spin between the two at most times, both inserts and background songs don't only fit the show amazingly well, they also share motifs all across the board and perfectly fit the occasion all the time. The way music is integrated into the narrative as well as previously mentioned motif sharing give the show a characteristic that only idol shows were really able to profit from previously, where the inserts actually mean something in-universe. Just this time around it's not about winning some tournament like in Love Live or iCuts, but rather about fisting aliens. Idol anime have had this advantage for years, but Symphogear manages to integrate it into an entirely foreign genre, which makes it all the better. The background music also has a very noticeable JRPG touch, which is easy to blame on Kaneko's involvement in the Wild Arms franchise, and I absolutely adore it. The art style is very unique, and the animations are also pretty good, especially for the earlier mentioned rather low budget the show had. I do have to concede I watched the Blu-ray version for this rewatch, so the animation is a lot better. And yes, high budget does not instantly equal good animation, but having a really low budget doesn't help much either, and you can definitely see the corners being cut all over the place. Camera movement being substituted for actual movement, or the atrocity of a keyframe shot you are seeing in the background right now are some of the worst examples, but all in all the show handles its animation pretty well, and obviously a lot of the issues like the ones I pointed out get redone in the Blu-ray release. While also not getting the best of animation often, the fight choreography is great, and it's simply a joy to be carried through the fights and just be immersed in the carnage that results from the slicing, shooting, and fisting of noise. What I think is a really nice twist on common genre tropes is that the characters don't use the rather notorious attack callouts that especially many magical girl shows are known for. Instead, Symphogear resorts to beautiful, very characteristic and fitting still cards showing the attack and its name in a style unique to every character, with Tsubasa's cards taking an old high arts Japanese style, Kanade's one single card being a comic pop art, and Chris cards being very edgy for lack of a better term. Obviously, these tie in with the gear users' fighting styles and choice of music as well, with Tsubasa mainly using a katana and other slim blades while singing J-pop with themes evocative of Japanese high arts, Chris using guns and rockets to blow up everything while singing rock, and Hibiki just fisting the shit out of everything with a strong Celtic inspiration in her music. Now, the issues that cropped up to me during the rewatch were actually far and few in between. Some of the characters have thematically similar backstories, mainly Kanade's parents dying in a noise attack and Chris' parents dying in a terrorist attack in South America, which also ends up getting her into an implied child trafficking ring. But that's less distracting from the experience, and it's more to the fact that this world is kind of in chaos. Some people would seem to think that Fine is unnecessarily stubborn in her villainous views, but honestly, I have to disagree with that. Remember, every villain is the hero of their own story. As messed up as her plans might be, getting her long-forgotten Babylonian god to love her by eradicating all conflict in the world via the means of destroying all of humanity is a pretty solid scheme, seeing how said god himself practically disowned her as a priestess to him when he shattered humanity along with the Tower of Babel, creating different languages and conflict in the same strike. This will not surprise you if you are familiar with Kaneko's previous work, but yes, as also visible in some of Symphogear's names and pretty much the vast majority of his lore, as well as almost anything related to actually operating Symphogears, this show heavily relies on themes of mythology and the origins of history. The way this is implemented is honestly kind of fascinating. Similar to a few things in the Wild Arms before, Kaneko borrows a lot of actual basic facts from mythology and her limited knowledge of Mesopotamia, and uses the resulting base as a canvas to draw his own interpretations on, while not abandoning said base. Hint freaking hint. This world, while probably reading way too much into it, led to countless sleepless nights for me back when I originally watched the show, and honestly, while it doesn't go to the same extent anymore, this stuff seriously still intrigues me. It is very fitting to, yet heavily contrasts the show's otherwise very futuristic and clean aesthetic, as well as shrouding a lot of the main plot's threads in actual mystery. Anyways, got sidetracked a little there. Getting back to the topic of issues I was trying to point out, another thing I feel is overstated as a problem is that all three main characters practically come back to life before the climax. Sure, it absolutely doesn't make sense in a setting we're made to believe is realistic, but not only does that fact drown in hype, it also perfectly fits the themes of the show and the idea of music-powered magical girls, and leads to some of the most over-the-top attacks I personally have ever seen in the anime, let alone magical girl anime. The climax being nonsense legitimately gets lost in the fact that it's the climax, and the fact that it manages to pull this kind of overshadowing off in a more serious setting is quite the testament to not how necessarily well, but definitely firmly Symphogear is written. Fuck, the show even manages to cut out the classic not for the OP moment for the true final climax. And yes, this show has 2 climaxes in 2 episodes, the first of which does actually use the opening song. And no, that is not a poorly written sex joke, because if it was, I would have said countless instead of 2, so we could all laugh at lesbians. Ha ha. Now that that's out of our system, let's get back to trying to complain about this show. Some people seem to think the curve at which our characters get stronger is too steep, to the point of calling it out as power creep. While I can totally see where they're coming from, I honestly don't think that way, because not only are the characters of course getting better with time, including some pretty large time skips, they obviously also need to be strong enough to actually take on what the anime throws at them. And while some missions are not 100% successful, I do have to concede that an actual full-on failure thrown somewhere in there would have been very nice. But even with that, Symphogear manages to perfectly balance the steadily rising amount of spectacle and power of the main characters that builds up to the climax really well. Heck, even the second season G managed to really up the ante and spectacle while not forgetting the story that keeps things coherent. Hint freaking hint! Anyways, the one true issue I've had with this show after rewatching it was the ending scene, where we are catapulted back to sad girl crying over dead girl's grave in episode 1. Because now we get to see what happens afterwards. Miku gets ripped out of her morning session by a scream. Following this, she finds a woman surrounded by a pack of noise and helps her flee from it, just to be surrounded by a bigger pack on the run. But fret not, we aren't killing any characters quite yet, because just as time starts running out for the two, the noise are reduced to tiny shreds of split by the attack of a Symphogear. Yes, even after blowing up in space, all 3 main characters are still well and alive in the most unexplained asshole in all of Symphogear. They explain the entire situation as, oh sorry, we had to go undercover and pretend we were dead because government, which is also shown in the OVAs for the 2nd season. But I say bullshit! Because Miku is the single closest person to Hibiki and even got drawn into this entire thing halfway through the series. There is no way she was not informed about this! To me, this honestly is more of an upset than any of the other ass pulls the show manages to pull over its runtime, because it simply doesn't fit the theme of the show. Anyways, all in all, I have to say that against my expectations, rewatching Symphogear really hasn't changed my original opinion that much. Yes, I have noticed many more flaws that I didn't see before, but I still couldn't really care about them much. Either because of nostalgia, or just because I had such a good time, especially now that I let myself actually enjoy the music for once. Or I'm just looking into it way too much and I was still suffering from the whiplash I got from episode 1, and thus couldn't give a shit if I wanted to. Whichever it is, it doesn't really matter, as my enjoyment was just as high in both cases. So, in the end, even through all the flaws the show does in a critical sense have, if I had to score the show, I'd give it 4 out of 5 unnecessary ass shots and a rape lawsuit. Hey there! Thanks for watching this first episode of Symphogear September. As the name might imply, I will be releasing a video on every season of Symphogear over the next few weeks. To some parts it's a batch, to some it's a setup for a way bigger project that'll take a lot more time, so if you want to stay tuned on that, the other reviews, or my content in general, subscribe to my channel and leave a like to let me know you liked the video. Bisa out!
Here, it's like a nightmare.